They were crushed, drowned, and buried by something the company already knew was unsafe, and the warning signs were written on the walls long before anyone died. The victims were not anonymous. They were dock workers, firefighters, housewives, children, and laborers living in one of Boston's most industrialized neighborhoods. Many lived within sight of the steel tank that loomed over the North End waterfront. It stored millions of gallons of industrial molasses, a key ingredient in wartime alcohol production and commercial food processing. The tank was not hidden. It was a daily presence, visible, audible, and increasingly feared. Residents had complained for years. Molasses leaked constantly from the seams, dripping down the sides in thick brown streaks. Children scraped it off to chew. Workers reported loud groaning noises as the tank expanded and contracted. Nearby buildings shook when shipments were added too quickly. These were not rumors. They were documented observations shared by employees, neighbors, and local officials. Yet the tank remained in operation, filled and refilled at aggressive speeds that ignored basic engineering limits. The company responsible, United States Industrial Alcohol, had acquired the tank to support large-scale ethanol production. Speed mattered more than safety. The faster molasses could be unloaded from ships and transferred into storage, the faster it could be processed into alcohol. No independent structural tests were performed before the tank was put into service. No licensed engineer signed off on its design. The man overseeing construction had no formal engineering training. Rivets were undersized. Steel plates were thinner than specifications required. Even the tank's height-to-diameter ratio created unnecessary stress. Employees noticed leaks immediately after construction. Instead of repairing them, the company painted the tank brown to hide the seepage. Internal company memos later confirmed executives were aware of structural weaknesses. Still, production continued. The neighborhood around the tank was densely populated. The waterfront area was a mix of tenements, fire stations, elevated rail lines, stables, warehouses, and small businesses. Many residents were immigrants or working-class families with limited political influence. They lived and worked in close proximity to industrial infrastructure that was rarely held to modern safety standards. On the day the tank failed, it had recently been filled to near capacity. The molasses inside was warm from a recent shipment, creating internal pressure. Fermentation gases had likely increased that pressure further. The steel walls, already compromised, began to fail. Witnesses reported a sharp metallic crack, followed by a deep, thunder-like roar. The tank split apart. Rivets shot outward like bullets. Steel plates folded and tore free. What followed was not a spill, it was a structural collapse that released a massive wave of viscous liquid with destructive force comparable to a freight train. The molasses surged through the streets at an estimated speed of over 30 miles per hour. It knocked buildings off their foundations, snapped utility poles, and tore apart wooden structures. An elevated railway trestle collapsed under the weight. A firehouse was pushed from its base. Horses were lifted and carried. People were thrown into debris fields and pinned beneath wreckage. Molasses does not behave like water. As it cooled, it thickened rapidly, trapping victims where they fell. Some drowned slowly, unable to free their limbs. Others were crushed by debris carried in the wave. Rescue efforts were immediate but chaotic. Firefighters, sailors, soldiers, and volunteers waded into knee-deep sludge, using axes and hands to dig people out. Many could not be saved. At least 21 people were killed. More than 150 were injured. The true number of injuries was likely higher, as undocumented workers and residents avoided hospitals. Bodies were recovered 4 days. Some were so coated in molasses they were initially unrecognizable. The cleanup took weeks. The area smelled of sugar and decay, but the streets were cleared. The case had lasting legal consequences. It helped establish corporate liability for industrial disasters. It reinforced the requirement for licensed engineers to approve large-scale structures. It influenced building codes and inspection standards across the United States. Yet unresolved questions remain. Why was the tank allowed to operate without proper oversight for so long? Why were resident complaints ignored by city authorities? Why did it take a mass casualty event to force accountability? Internal company documents suggest profit, pressure and wartime demand drove decisions, but no single individual was held personally responsible. Some records indicate the company increased tank capacity beyond original plans without reinforcing the structure. Others suggest cost-cutting measures reduced material quality. The full extent of executive awareness remains unclear, as many internal communications were never preserved. The victims' names faded from public memory faster than the legal precedents. The site was eventually cleared. A park now occupies part of the area. There is no towering tank to warn passers-by, but the disaster remains a case study in ignored evidence, systemic failure, and the human cost of corporate negligence. This was not an accident caused by nature. It was not unforeseeable. The danger was visible, audible, and documented. The tank failed because warnings were cheaper to ignore than repairs, and because those at risk had little power to force change. The Great Molasses Flood is remembered as an oddity, a strange footnote in history, but stripped of novelty. It is a familiar story: unsafe infrastructure, ignored warnings, deflected blame, and accountability that arrived only after lives were lost. The evidence was there long before the tank split open. What failed was not just steel, but responsibility.